Me and Ezra all sitting here, I feel like it's a class reunion. I know.
Things outside the three of us have taken a real turn. But
we're all exactly the same people, all in very different circumstances.
Yes, exactly.
But we all go way back. Thank you, Chris, and congratulations on the book, Ezra. Well done.
Thank you.
All right, and thanks to Home for joining us this hour. Happy Friday night. Really, really happy to have you here. I've got a story we're going to lead with tonight that I don't think you've heard anywhere else. We are going to start tonight in Haddon Township, New Jersey. Haddon, Haddon Township. It's pretty close to Camden. It's also pretty close to Philly, but it's a very, very New Jersey place, and I mean that in the best possible way. We have been watching one particular community story unfold in Haddon Township, New Jersey over the course of the last couple of weeks. And I want you to see this story and what's happened here over the last couple of weeks, because I think it tells you something about where we are at right now as a people and as a country.
In Haddon Township Saturday, an outpouring of support. Both sides of Haddon Ave lined with people, all here to stand behind the Eminette family, owners of this local restaurant, Jersey Kebab, after parents Jalal and Amina were arrested by ICE Tuesday morning.
It's been truly a roller coaster of feelings for the last few days.
Their son, Muhammad, says his mom remains in ICE custody. His dad was released with an ankle bracelet. While they are closed until further notice, he was here cooking free food for the community that has shown his family love, filling their store windows with notes and raising hundreds of thousands of dollars.
This shows me, this is not okay.
it just saddens us.
ICE released a statement Friday. While they did not share many specific details about the case, a spokesperson did write in part, as with any non-citizen in the U.S. without lawful status, ICE officers make enforcement decisions on a case-by-case basis to focus on the greatest threats to Homeland Security. Muhammad says his parents have no criminal histories, and he says they are not threats, known here to give back.
I think it's obvious. It's clear that they're a pillar of the community. They're a model.
With Ramadan now underway, Muhammad says his family is so focused is on securing his mom's release from ICE custody.
The situation, the court case will go on, but all we worry about is just having our mom by our side.
In the meantime, the community says they will continue to show support, many writing letters on the family's behalf.
We're going to stick with them no matter how long this takes.
In Haddon Township, Siobhan McGurl, NBC 10 News.
We're going to stick with them no matter how long this takes. So that was starting a couple weeks ago, these protests in Haddon Township, New Jersey, over the mom from the beloved local Jersey Kebab shop being arrested by the Trump administration. It turns out that was just a start.
One by one, community members had their handwritten letters notarized and tucked in an envelope to send to the court.
The goal is for the judges, the politicians, and anyone locally with influence and power to know that the community stands by this resident.
Isis Williams is the president of a group working to bring inclusivity and equity to their community. Members set up a letter writing campaign Sunday on behalf of M&A Eminette.
We are a loving environment in this town.
Dozens of people packed into a yoga studio just down the street from the kebab business.
Emil's a great person, runs a great business here on Haddon Ave that we eat at frequently, has done a lot, especially through COVID, caring for members of the community.
All hoping their words of experience with the Eminettes would make a difference.
Their business is a beloved establishment that brings both delicious food and beautiful culture that enriches the community.
Again, this is Haddon Township, New Jersey. And I'm telling you, that wasn't the end of it either. Watch this.
Here in Camden County, we take it as a personal attack on all of us.
In South Jersey, a gathering of support for a family facing uncertainty.
The really only thing we wish we could have is our mother by our side.
Randy Teague is the mayor in Haddon Township, where Jersey Kebab is located.
We consider this situation maybe somewhat different than some of the other ones that we hear on TV, where there's criminals and rapists and so forth coming into our country. They came in here legally, and they're trying to stay here legally.
This family is a family that embodies the very best of Camden County. And now they're torn apart by this broken immigration system. It is time to stand up for good people. It is time to stand up for humanity. These folks do not deserve this. These folks do not deserve this.
different everywhere. It involves all kinds of people in all kinds of places, and it takes all kinds of forms. Don't let anybody tell you that pushback doesn't matter, that it doesn't work.
Amina Eminent is back home for the very first time in 2 weeks. The love and all of those messages continue to pour out here at her restaurant. She tells us today all she wants to do really is be with her family and come back to Jersey Kebab.
I'm so happy now.
All smiles for Amina Eminent. Just moments before the grandmother met with the media, she emerged from the ICE detention center in Elizabeth, New Jersey to her waiting family. Hugs and flowers for the woman who's grabbed the hearts of many in her Haddon Township neighborhood. She has one thing on her mind right now.
That she wants to spend some quality time with her children and her grandchildren first, and then afterwards she wants to return to Jersey Kebab immediately.
Her son Mohammed translated for her. Amina was quick to thank everyone for standing behind her family.
Support that, the community has showed for us, and how they protected us, and almost like put like a protective chamber around our family during these times. It made her very emotional.
She wants to return to Jersey Kebab immediately. It's all footage and coverage from NBC 10 News in Philadelphia. One community, as her son put it, putting a protective chamber around this one local family. Getting together, meeting in person, writing letters, rousting their local officials and getting them to make some noise about it, getting them to hold a press conference about it, getting the local media to cover it, people showing up in person, protesting in person. And they just kept doing thing after thing after thing, and it worked. And at least for now, for that family, it's obviously the most important thing in the world. But for this town, it also showed this town that all those things, showing up and writing letters and roasting your elected officials and holding press conferences and getting the local media involved and protesting, showing up in person, it works. It matters. Haddon Township, New Jersey this week. In 1942, there was a Boy Scout troop in Cody, Wyoming. And if you've ever been in Boy Scouts, or if you've ever had a kid, or in my case, a brother in Boy Scouts, you might know that the big day on the calendar is, say it with me now, Boy Scout Jamboree. In 1942, in Wyoming, a Boy Scout troop put out a call to all the nearby Boy Scout troops in all the nearby towns that they should get together to do the Boy Scout Jamboree that year, which is like, merit badge stuff and tying knots and digging ditches and making campfires, pitching tents and camping out. It's all that stuff. But in 1942 in Wyoming, when this one troop put out the call for the Jamboree, the other Boy Scout troops in the area did not respond, or they said no. Only one local Boy Scout troop in Cody, Wyoming, said yes, they would do it. The reason everybody else said no, or they didn't bother to answer, is because the Boy Scout troop that put out the call for the Jamboree was the one inside Hart Mountain, behind the barbed wire at the internment camp at Hart Mountain, Wyoming. It's basically a concentration camp where Japanese Americans had been forcibly relocated by the US government at the start of World War II. Guard towers, barbed wire, soldiers with guns policing the perimeter, the whole thing. But that one Boy Scout troop from Cody, that's the one local troop that agreed to come to Hart Mountain to do a Scout Jamboree with the other Boy Scout troop there of Japanese American boys. And they did all the Jamboree stuff. They did the merit badge stuff. They tied knots. They set up tents. And they matched boys up from the two different troops. There were two particularly rambunctious, sort of, you might call them rowdy boys, one from each troop. A kid from Cody, whose name was Alan, and a kid from Hart Mountain, who was named Norman. And those two particularly rowdy kids, they ended up putting them together. They camped together in the same tent. And they very quickly came up with a scheme together. Because, see, there was this other kid from the Cody troop who Alan really didn't like. He said he was a bully. He really didn't like that kid. And so he enlisted his new tent mate, this kid from Hart Mountain, Norman. He enlisted him in a plan. They thought that rain was going to be coming that night when they were camping out in their tent. And so the two of them, Alan and Norman, who had just met, they very carefully dug a moat around their own tent with a channel that led off the moat and downhill. And the channel was aimed right at the tent of the kid who was the bully. And then in the middle of the night, sure enough, the rain came down, the moat filled up, and then the channel off the moat worked. And that downstream tent got inundated with all the rainwater from Alan and Norman's moat, and the bully's tent collapsed. And Alan and Norman collapsed in gleeful laughter at the prank they had pulled. And having pulled that off, Alan and Norman became lifelong friends. That was a very unusual Boy Scout jamboree at Heart Mountain internment camp in 1942. More than 40 years later, in 1988, that little kid, Alan, from Cody, was now Republican U.S. Senator Alan Simpson of Wyoming. And that little kid, Norman, from Heart Mountain, he was now Democratic Congressman Norm Mineta. And together, in 1988, they convened bipartisan hearings on the legally, strategically, and morally disastrous decisions that led to 120,000 Japanese Americans, some of them citizens, some of them not, being forced out of their homes and forcibly relocated into prison camps. Alan Simpson and Norm Mineta drafted the 1988 Civil Liberties Act, which was signed into law by a president named Ronald Reagan. And that said that the internment of Japanese Americans in this country, which had been done under a law that dated back to the 1700s, a rarely used legal authority. That law signed by Ronald Reagan in 1988, the Civil Liberties Act, said that the internment of Japanese Americans had been based on racial prejudice and war hysteria and a failure of political leadership. 1988 Civil Liberties Act formally apologized on behalf of the United States of America to Japanese Americans for what we had done to them. And it paid them reparations just to try to make it right. The legal grounds for interning Japanese Americans in World War II was something called the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. That was only the third time it had ever been used in American history. It had been used in the War of 1812, it had been used in World War I, and it had been used for Japanese internment in World War II. Last night, we started to see headlines like this one at the Wall Street Journal, quote, Trump to invoke seldom used wartime law from 1798. Or this one from CBS News. Professor says Trump's plan to invoke Alien Enemies Act of 1798 sidesteps immigration laws. And then, inevitably, because of the history of that law, we started to see last night headlines like this. From the ABC affiliate in San Diego, in this case, Japanese Americans react to Trump's plan to invoke Alien Enemies Act. And then this morning, we got the news that Senator Alan Simpson of Wyoming died today in Cody, Wyoming, where he was from. He was 93 years old. President Donald Trump gave a speech today at the U.S. Justice Department, which itself is a rare thing for a president to do. In that speech, he was expected. White House sources had made clear to lots of reporters that President Trump was expected to announce at that speech that he is going to invoke the Japanese internment law. He is going to invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which again has only ever been used 3 times before in our country and always in wartime. And the last time we used it, men like Norm Mineta and Alan Simpson and freaking Ronald Reagan ended up moving the nation to apologize for it, to call it a stain on our national honor, and not only to formally apologize, but to pay reparations for what we have done. Trump wants to do it again, according to multiple White House sources in speaking with multiple reporters at multiple news agencies. That said, Trump didn't announce it at the Justice Department at his speech today. And he might have meant to, who knows? His speech went completely off the rails. He started giving what sounded like orders to Justice Department officials in the room that they should go after a government watchdog group, crew, that has brought lawsuits against his administration. The Justice Department should act against them somehow and for something. he started to say that the Justice Department should go after CNN and should go after MSNBC and should go after a whole big list of people he sees as his enemies. So his speech, who knows how much of that was written and how much of it was just him being moved in the moment. He got so wound up about telling the Justice Department individually to go after his enemies today that maybe he forgot the part about let's rerun Japanese internment. But presumably that's coming. I'm assuming that it'll come in some midnight or 4 a.m. announcement or some misspelled all capital letters Truth Social post or something. We'll see. Today there was a big protest in Washington by and for U.S. veterans as Trump moves to fire 83,000 people who work at the VA serving our veterans. There was actually a really big turnout today in Washington for that veterans protest. Thousands of people turned out on the National Mall for that. They chose today for this protest, March 14th, 314, as a reference to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which is where it says that you're disqualified from holding office in this country if you have engaged in insurrection against this country. And there were more protests by veterans and by people supporting veterans, not just in D.C. today, but in St. Louis, Missouri, at the VA Medical Center there, and in Madison, Wisconsin, at the state capitol there, and in Concord, New Hampshire, at the state capitol there, and in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and in Bismarck, North Dakota, and at the Arkansas state capitol, and at the Airport Rotary in Hyannis, Massachusetts today, and at the Massachusetts state capitol in Boston, and in Tallahassee, Florida, and at the Ohio State House in Columbus, Ohio. Veterans protest today all over this country. At a very difficult town hall for Republican Congressman Chuck Edwards in North Carolina last night, one man identifying himself as a veteran was thrown out of the room at the congressman's insistence and cheered loudly by everybody else in the room after he shouted at the Republican congressman, "You don't get to take away our rights." Well, Republican Congressman Andy Harris showed up in Cambridge, Maryland last night to give a speech. He was greeted with this big 3D milk carton, as if he's a missing kid on the milk carton. Also greeted with a lot of outraged constituents from his own district in Maryland, people demanding that he meet with them, that he do a town hall, something, to answer for what Trump and Republicans are just doing to dismantle the federal government. This was the protest in Bay City, Michigan today, as local people turned out to greet Vice President J.D. Vance when he showed up in town to do a speech at a local plastics factory. The fact that he was at a plastics factory explains signs like this one: "Wrap Vance in plastic, shipped to Russia." This was a protest outside the Tesla dealership in West Bloomfield, Michigan yesterday. This was Navy Captain and U.S. Senator Mark Kelly today in Washington, explaining that today he is selling his Tesla.
Hey folks, Mark Kelly. Here in Washington. I'm driving to work for the last time in my Tesla. When I bought this thing, I didn't think it was going to become a political issue. Every time I get in this car in the last 60 days or so, it reminds me of just how much damage Elon Musk and Donald Trump is doing to our country. Talking about slashing Social Security, cutting healthcare benefits for poor people, for seniors. It's one bad thing after the next. He's firing veterans. I'm a veteran. So I have a really hard time driving around in this thing. So I think it's time for an upgrade today. So this is going to be my last trip in this car. There were some things I really liked about it. There are things I didn't like about it, but that doesn't matter. What matters is doing the right thing. I think it's time to get rid of it. Elon Musk kind of turned out to be and I don't want to be driving the car built and designed by
Pushback looks different everywhere. It involves all kinds of people in all kinds of places, and it takes all kinds of forms. Can't win if you don't play. We've got big Justice Department news tonight. We've got truly unsettling news tonight about a volcano, and the volcano isn't the worst of it. We've got news about a big protest, a big national protest being called for Saturday, April 5th in Washington, D.C. We'll have details on that ahead of you tonight from one of the organizers. We've got a lot to get to tonight. Stay with us.